It was an ordinary Tuesday morning, or at least it should have been. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. Birds chirped lazily outside, and the smell of coffee floated through the kitchen. I was sitting at the table scrolling through my phone, trying to wake up fully when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Kearns, our neighbor. Usually she called about something trivial, a misplaced trash can, a lost cat, but this time her voice made me freeze. "They're tearing it down," she said, her words trembling. "Your sister's ramp. They're bulldozing it." I couldn't process it at first. My sister's ramp? The wheelchair ramp she had fought to build after her accident, the one that gave her independence and dignity. It was being destroyed. My heart skipped a beat, and suddenly the warm calm of the morning turned into a cold panic. I dropped my coffee mug onto the table. It rattled loudly, breaking the silence, but I barely noticed. I rushed out of the house, almost tripping over my own feet in a mix of fear and anger. As I reached my sister's driveway, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, in the bright morning light, was a small construction crew, surrounded by heavy equipment. A bulldozer hummed menacingly, its blade pressed against the edge of the ramp. An HOA sign stood crookedly nearby, fluttering in the wind, as if mocking her struggle. The ramp wasn't just wood and metal. It was her freedom, her dignity, her independence. And now strangers were trying to rip it from her life without a second thought. My hand shook, my stomach twisted, and for a moment, I felt completely powerless. "Hey, stop," I shouted, running toward them. "Stop right now." The KBA crew paused, their faces registering confusion and unease. One of the men glanced nervously at the HOA representative, a tall man in a crisp suit who looked far too confident for the situation. "We have orders," he said, his voice hesitant. "We're just following the rules." I felt my blood boil. "Orders? Do you know what this ramp means? Do you know who you're messing with?" The man didn't answer. He just waved the bulldozer operator forward, and I could see the hesitation in every step. I reached for my sister's phone to call her, but it went straight to voicemail. Anxiety gnawed at my chest. I needed Amelia here. She needed to see this herself. Then, as if on cue, she appeared. Amelia rolled up smoothly in her electric wheelchair, her suit perfectly pressed, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears. She didn't look angry, not at first, but there was a quiet intensity in her eyes that made everyone around her pause. Even the bulldozer operator froze. I stepped back slightly, letting her take the lead. She surveyed the scene, slowly, deliberately. Her gaze swept over the ramp, then to the HOA rep, then to the construction crew. The air seemed to thicken. I could see the gears turning in her mind. And then it hit me. Amelia wasn't just my sister. She was Governor Amelia Hayes, feared and respected across the state. People listened when she spoke, and they obeyed when she commanded. And none of these people had realized who they were dealing with. A chill ran down my spine. The mistake they had made wasn't just legal or procedural. It was dangerous. For them. And for a moment, I felt a strange mix of fear and awe. My sister, the woman who had once been confined by her wheelchair, now carried a presence so powerful that it could stop bulldozers in their tracks. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. The morning sun glinted off the ramp, the wood warm and strong beneath her hands. That ramp wasn't just her way in and out of the house. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for, everything she had overcome, and now it was about to become a battlefield. Amelia stopped at the edge of the ramp, her wheelchair perfectly aligned with its slope, and looked up at the construction crew. There was a strange calm in her posture, a quiet power that made the men hesitate mid-step. I could see it in their eyes. They had expected a frail, helpless woman. What they got instead was a storm waiting to break. "Do you know who you are dealing with?" she asked, her voice soft but edged with authority. It wasn't shouting. It didn't need to be. Every word cut like steel. The HOA representative, the man in the suit, stumbled backward as if he had been slapped. We just have orders," he stammered. His words trembled like a leaf in the wind. We didn't know. We didn't think. You didn't think? Amelia's eyes narrowed. You didn't think that someone who lives here has fought for every inch of her independence? That someone who uses a wheelchair has the right to access her own home without fear of being attacked by your rules? The bulldozer operator shifted uncomfortably. He swallowed hard and looked away, but Amelia didn't flinch. She didn't need to shout or threaten. They could feel the weight of her authority without a single raised voice. Her calm anger was terrifying. I stood behind her, gripping the railing, my heart pounding. I had seen her in press conferences, delivering speeches, signing bills, making decisions that changed thousands of lives. But I had never seen her like this. Here, in our quiet neighborhood, facing down a group of people who had thought they could bully her. The contrast was jarring. She wasn't just powerful on paper. Her presence demanded respect, demanded obedience. Amelia wheeled closer to the HOA rep, her hands resting on the armrests of her chair. You are about to make a very big mistake, she said. Do you understand me? He nodded quickly, but his eyes betrayed him. He had underestimated her. They all had. Then she did something unexpected. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. The sound of the ringing echoed across the driveway. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Amelia's finger hovered over the screen as she spoke into the receiver, her tone measured, deliberate, dangerous. I couldn't hear the words, but the effect was immediate. The HOA rep's confident posture crumbled. His suit no longer gave him authority. His face was pale, and he looked like a man who had just realized he was about to be swallowed whole by consequences. The men with the bulldozer glanced at each other, shifting uneasily. Their confidence had vanished, replaced by fear. Amelia didn't even raise her voice. Her words carried weight, because she carried power, the kind of power that didn't need theatrics. She had fought battles far bigger than this. She had faced legislators, corporate lobbyists, and bureaucrats who thought they could intimidate her. The HOA crew? They were amateurs, playing with a firestorm they couldn't even begin to understand. I took a deep breath, watching her. Every muscle in her face was tense, but her hands remained steady. She wheeled slowly along the edge of the ramp, inspecting it like a general surveying her battlefield. This wasn't about politics, or laws, or rules written on paper. It was about dignity, respect, and human decency, and she would not allow anyone to take that away. Finally, she hung up the phone. Her expression didn't soften, but the energy in the air shifted. The HOA rep opened his mouth, but no words came. Amelia had already spoken, and her silence now was a final command. The crew backed away slowly, their bulldozer idling but powerless. They realized too late that they had made a grave mistake. For the first time that morning, I felt a glimmer of hope. Amelia wasn't just my sister. She was unstoppable. And anyone who thought they could bully her into submission was about to learn, the hard way, that some mistakes carry consequences far beyond their imagination. The ramp stood strong, a symbol of her fight, her freedom, and the unshakable power that came from living life on her own terms. And Amelia? She was ready to remind everyone that strength often comes in unexpected forms. Amelia stayed by the ramp, her wheelchair still, yet her presence was electric. The crew had stepped back, uncertain, and the HOA representative hovered like a man, waiting for a verdict he knew he couldn't escape. I could see the subtle shift in their energy. What they had assumed was a quiet, powerless neighbor had turned into something formidable, someone who commanded attention without raising her voice. Her eyes scanned the construction crew, and I could tell she was calculating every move. Amelia had always been smart, meticulous, and unafraid of confrontation, but this was different. This was personal. The ramp wasn't just a structure of wood and nails. It was a symbol of everything she had fought for in her life after the accident. Every scraped knee, every hospital stay, every moment of frustration had built up to this very day, and she was not about to let it be destroyed. She spoke again, her voice calm, precise, cutting through the morning air like a knife. You are all here to follow orders, she said, looking directly at the HOA rep. But orders don't give you the right to trample someone's life. Do you understand that? he stammered, unable to answer, his face pale. The construction crew exchanged nervous glances. I could almost hear their thoughts. What is this woman capable of? Why does she scare us without shouting? Amelia wheeled closer to the ramp and ran her hand along its sturdy surface. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers, a subtle human touch, a reminder that beneath the power and fearsome presence she was still my sister. And yet even that small gesture carried strength. She was showing them, silently, that this ramp wasn't just wood. It was her life, her independence, her dignity, and she would defend it with everything she had got. Then she did something unexpected. She pulled out her phone and typed rapidly, sending a text. I knew immediately she was calling in backup. People who understood authority, people who would make the HOA think twice before they ever touched her property again. Her calmness hid a storm about to be unleashed. She didn't need to yell or threaten, she had a network and she knew how to use it. The HOA rep looked around, finally realizing he had miscalculated. This wasn't a neighborly dispute. He wasn't dealing with someone who would quietly accept being bullied. He was facing a force that could dismantle his credibility, ruin his reputation, and make every mistake he had ever made look trivial compared to the fury of a wronged governor. I stayed, silent, watching as Amelia wheeled herself back slightly, her posture straight, almost regal. The crew didn't move. The sun glinted off the ramp, highlighting the polished wood and the careful construction. It looked almost untouchable now, not just because it was sturdy, but because the woman beside it made it untouchable. She looked at me then, a soft but powerful glance that said, "This is bigger than anger. This is about justice." And suddenly I understood. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about scaring anyone. This was about making sure that the world understood her boundaries, that the rights of the disabled, the vulnerable, and the independent could never be trampled. Amelia had become a living example of strength, proof that no one, no matter how arrogant or powerful, could underestimate her. The morning air was heavy with tension. The birds had stopped singing. Even the bulldozer seemed to hum lower, as if intimidated by the quiet authority Amelia radiated. And for the first time I realized that this wasn't just about a ramp. This was a battle of wills. One side had underestimated the quiet power of a determined woman, and the other side was about to prove just how unstoppable she could be. I swallowed hard, feeling a mixture of pride and awe. Amelia had faced bigger challenges, yes, but today she was not only my sister, she was a force of nature, and anyone who had assumed she would remain silent, passive, or weak was about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The calm before the storm was almost unbearable, but I knew it wouldn't last long. Amelia had made her presence known. The world was about to find out in no uncertain terms that she did not tolerate injustice. And I, standing silently behind her, felt my chest swell with pride and fear at the same time. Amelia didn't wait. She wheeled herself closer to the edge of the ramp, her movement smooth and controlled, each motion deliberate, commanding attention. The construction crew stood frozen, their hands hovering nervously near the controls of the bulldozer. The HOA representative's confident posture had completely crumbled. He looked like a man caught in a nightmare he could not wake from. Without a word, Amelia lifted her phone and dialed a number. The sound of the call echoed across the driveway, and the tension in the air tightened. The crew shifted uneasily, sensing that this was no ordinary complaint. Amelia spoke in a calm, precise tone. I could not hear the words, but the effect was immediate. The HOA rep paled further, his knees nearly buckling. He had assumed she was just a quiet neighbor, someone who would comply with their rules. He had assumed wrong. Minutes later, the first of the reinforcements arrived. A state inspector, official and authoritative, stepped onto the property, clipboard in hand. Amelia greeted him with a nod, her expression still composed but her eyes burned with controlled fire. She explained the situation succinctly, pointing to the ramp, the crew, and the unauthorized demolition attempt. Every word was exact, professional, and absolute. The inspector nodded gravely, then turned to the HOA crew. "You have no legal right to remove this ramp," he said, his voice carrying the weight of law and authority. "Stop immediately and leave the premises." The crew looked at each other, panic spreading across their faces. Amelia's calm presence had already unnerved them, but now, legal authority reinforced by her personal command made them tremble. The bulldozer operator reluctantly backed away, muttering apologies under his breath. Amelia wheeled herself along the ramp, her fingers brushing its smooth wooden edge. I watched her, my chest swelling with admiration. The ramp wasn't just a piece of construction. It was her symbol of resilience, her declaration that she would not be broken by circumstance, by bureaucracy, or by ignorance. And she wasn't just protecting wood and nails. She was protecting a piece of herself, a life rebuilt from struggle and determination. The HOA representative tried to speak again, his voice shaking. "Governor Hayes, we—" Amelia cut him off with a single look, calm and piercing. I said, "Stop. You have already made one enormous mistake. Do not make another." His face fell, and he slumped backward, realizing fully the depth of his misjudgment. This wasn't a neighborly dispute. This was a collision with someone who had spent years navigating power, authority, and influence, and who was not afraid to wield them when necessary. I could see the crew shrinking under her gaze. They were amateurs playing at enforcement, facing a woman who could, with a single call, bring legal action, media scrutiny, and public outrage upon them, and she wasn't bluffing. Amelia had the knowledge, the experience, and the respect of the state to make good on every implied threat. As the inspector completed his report, Amelia wheeled herself to me, her expression softening slightly. "They need to understand," she said quietly. "They need to understand that independence is not negotiable, that respect is not optional." I nodded, swallowing hard. Her power was not loud, not violent. It was precise, calculated, undeniable. She had turned the morning's panic into a masterclass of authority, showing that courage and determination could bend fear and ignorance to justice. The crew quietly dismantled their equipment and left, their heads low. The HOA representative lingered briefly, but Amelia's eyes held him in place until he finally turned and walked away. I could see the relief in the inspector's eyes, but even he looked slightly awed, understanding that this woman had the strength to fight and win with grace and control. Finally, the driveway fell silent. The ramp stood intact, a monument not just to Amelia's independence, but to her unstoppable spirit. She sat there, calm, dignified, almost regal. I realized, in that moment, that Amelia's power wasn't just in her title or her office. It was in her courage, in the unwavering refusal to be diminished, and in the ability to make people respect her without raising her voice. And I knew, with a certainty I had never felt before, that anyone who underestimated her, even by a fraction, would pay the price. By the afternoon, the neighborhood had begun to stir. Word of what had happened at Amelia's house spread like wildfire. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, whispered to each other in hushed tones, and slowly emerged from their homes. Everyone had assumed she was a quiet, private woman, someone who would stay out of disputes and avoid conflict. Now, the story of what had happened traveled from one house to the next, growing with each retelling, painting Amelia as someone unstoppable, someone who could make even the most confident men tremble. The HOA office was in chaos. The representative who had tried to bulldoze the ramp spent the day in meetings, apologizing profusely, drafting statements, and trying to contain the disaster he had helped create. He had underestimated her completely, and now he was paying the price. Amelia's name carried weight, and she had used it perfectly, carefully, decisively, without even needing to raise her voice. The fear she inspired was quiet, intelligent, and complete. Back at her home, Amelia wheeled herself along the ramp, inspecting it again, her fingers brushing over the smooth wood as if to reassure herself. She wasn't done yet, not fully. While the immediate threat had been neutralized, she understood the broader lesson that needed to be sent. People needed to know that independence could not be trampled, that dignity could not be ignored, and that underestimating her, or anyone in her position, was a costly mistake. I stayed nearby, watching her work with quiet admiration. Even after years of watching her navigate the complexities of politics, of facing public scrutiny and relentless challenges, seeing her in action here, in our small neighborhood, made me realize just how formidable she truly was. The ramp wasn't the only thing she was defending. It was every principle she had built her life around, every ounce of determination that had brought her back from her accident stronger than before. Neighbors began to approach, timidly at first, then with increasing confidence. Some whispered apologies for ever doubting her. Others offered quiet words of support. Amelia acknowledged them all with calm nods and small smiles, her demeanor dignified, almost regal. She did not need their admiration, but she accepted it, graciously, letting them see that strength could be paired with kindness. Meanwhile, the construction crew packed up their equipment and left, their heads low, avoiding eye contact. The fear in their eyes was palpable. They had been confident in the morning, sure that they were simply following orders, but they had learned a lesson they would never forget. Amelia had shown them that power was not always loud or aggressive. It could be quiet, precise, and terrifying. In its control, the HOA representative lingered briefly, trying to assert some shred of authority, but Amelia's calm, piercing gaze held him in place. Without a word, he understood the situation. He had been outmaneuvered, outclassed, and outmatched by someone he had underestimated entirely. Finally, he turned and left, humiliated and defeated. By evening, the story of Amelia's victory had reached the local news. Social media lit up with admiration for the governor who had defended her independence with intelligence and authority. Memes, posts, and comments praised her calm, strategic approach. People marveled at how she had taken a situation that could have escalated into chaos and turned it into a demonstration of skill, courage, and self-respect. I sat beside her on the porch as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ramp. She was quiet, thoughtful, but there was a faint smile on her face, a subtle satisfaction that came from knowing she had won not just for herself, but for every person who might be underestimated or overlooked. "This isn't just about me," she said softly, almost to herself. "It's about showing that independence, dignity, and respect are not negotiable." I nodded, feeling a swell of pride that made my chest ache. Amelia had faced challenges far bigger than a small HOA, yet she had treated this as both a battle and a lesson. And as I looked at her, at the ramp still standing strong, I knew that this moment would linger in the minds of everyone who had doubted her. Amelia had turned a threat into a symbol of power, strength, and unshakable courage. The neighborhood would never forget the day Governor Amelia Hayes defended her ramp and showed everyone exactly what it meant to be unstoppable. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the neighborhood in soft gold and amber, Amelia remained on her porch, her wheelchair resting beside the ramp she had fought so hard to protect. The chaos of the morning and the confrontation with the HOA felt distant now, almost unreal. Yet the weight of what had happened pressed gently against her chest. She had won. The ramp stood untouched, her independence intact, and the fear she had inspired would ripple through the community for years. I sat beside her, silent, just watching her. For most people, the wheelchair was a symbol of limitation, of dependence. But with Amelia, it was different. It had never been a weakness. It had become a part of her strength. Every movement she made, every decision she took, carried the authority of someone who had faced life's hardest battles and refused to be broken. The ramp was a symbol, yes, but Amelia herself was the true monument to resilience, to courage, and to quiet, unstoppable power. She finally spoke, her voice soft, almost intimate, yet carrying an unmistakable weight. "I didn't want to scare them," she said. "I didn't want this to be about fear, but they needed to understand. Independence isn't something anyone can take away. Not by law, not by authority, and certainly not by ignorance. I nodded, still processing everything I had witnessed. There was a subtle humility in her words, a quiet recognition that power without purpose could be empty. But Amelia's power was purposeful. It was rooted in justice, in the simple idea that no one should be diminished because of circumstance, mobility, or underestimation. The neighborhood had begun to calm, the murmurs replaced with cautious whispers of respect and awe. People peered from behind curtains or walked slowly past the house, glancing at the ramp and at Amelia, as if seeing her in a completely new light. The fear had faded slightly, replaced by admiration. But I knew that the memory of her authority, the calm decisiveness, the unflinching presence, would linger in their minds far longer than admiration alone. Amelia wheeled herself along the ramp slowly, her hands brushing the surface. I could see the tiny scars on the wood from years of use, the polished edges softened by time and care. Each mark told a story, the triumphs, the struggles, the quiet victories that came from simply refusing to be limited. And she had fought, not just for herself, but for every person who might one day need to defend their right to live freely and with dignity. I want them to remember this, she said, her gaze distant, thoughtful, not because of me but because of what it represents. Strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest power. I realized then that she was speaking not just about the HOA or the ramp, but about life itself. People saw her wheelchair, assumed vulnerability and expected weakness. They had no idea that the courage and intelligence inside her were far greater than they could ever imagine. And she had reminded them, gently, decisively, perfectly, that underestimating someone based on appearances was a dangerous mistake. The wind stirred, rustling the leaves of the trees, carrying with it a soft sense of calm after the storm. Amelia leaned back in her chair, letting the evening wash over her. Her eyes held a mixture of reflection and quiet triumph, the kind that comes from knowing you've stood your ground, faced the world, and emerged with dignity intact. I sat beside her in silence, knowing that the lesson she had imparted went far beyond the ramp or the HOA. It was about courage. It was about justice. It was about the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone else define your worth. And as the sky turned from gold to deep purple, I realized something profound. Amelia wasn't just my sister, she was a force, a quiet, unstoppable force. And in her own way, she had changed the neighborhood, the HOA, and even me, showing that true power is not always loud. It is unwavering, precise, and deeply rooted in who you are. By the next morning, the neighborhood had completely changed. People moved with quiet respect, glancing at Amelia's house and the ramp that now felt like a monument to strength. Word had spread quickly. Neighbors who had once ignored her, dismissed her, or doubted her independence were now speaking her name in hushed admiration. The story of the governor who had stopped a bulldozer crew and humbled the HOA had become a legend. Amelia watched it all with calm composure. She didn't seek attention or applause. She didn't need it. Her victory was not about showing off power. It was about ensuring that respect for independence and dignity was absolute. The ramp stood as a symbol, but the real triumph was invisible to the casual eye. It was in the way she had faced fear, controlled a situation that could have spiraled into chaos, and taught a lesson that would last far longer than anyone expected. The HOA representative was gone, quietly resigning in shame. The construction crew had packed up and left, their confidence replaced with a trembling awareness of their mistake. Everyone involved had learned something that day. Some people cannot be underestimated, and some fights are worth standing for, no matter the size of the enemy or the risk involved. I stayed close to Amelia as she wheeled along her ramp again, touching the polished edges, feeling the familiar wood beneath her hands. I could see the quiet satisfaction in her eyes, but it was tempered with something deeper. Reflection. She understood power differently than most people. For her, it wasn't about fear, domination, or revenge. It was about principle, fairness, and the courage to stand up for what was right. The ramp isn't just for me, she said softly, almost to herself. It's for anyone who feels overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. It's proof that strength doesn't always come in a loud voice or a towering figure. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, and unshakable. I nodded, swallowing hard. I realized in that moment that I had witnessed something remarkable. Not just the defense of a ramp, but the demonstration of a life philosophy. Amelia's courage had created ripples far beyond our neighborhood. The story would reach far and wide, inspiring people who thought they had limits, showing them that independence, respect, and dignity could never be taken if you refused to let it. Even the local news picked up the story. Clips of Amelia calmly confronting the HOA and controlling the situation went viral. People marveled at her poise, her intelligence, and the subtle authority that didn't shout but commanded attention. Memes and posts celebrated her. Not for theatrics, not for drama, but for unwavering strength and moral clarity. And through it all, she remained composed, never seeking the spotlight, letting her actions speak louder than any words. That evening, as the sky turned pink and purple, Amelia and I sat on her porch together, watching the neighborhood settle into calm silence. The ramp glowed softly in the fading light, a symbol of her victory and resilience. I realized then that the lesson wasn't just for the HOA or the construction crew, or even the neighbors. It was for me. I learned that courage doesn't have a single shape. It can exist in quiet defiance, in careful planning, in unwavering self-respect. Amelia had shown me that strength was not always obvious, but it was always formidable. I reached out and held her hand, feeling the warmth and determination that had protected her freedom that morning. She smiled softly, the faintest curve of her lips, and I understood that her fight was over, but the impact would last forever. She had not only defended her ramp, she had defended herself, her dignity, and every person who might one day face similar challenges. And as night fell, the neighborhood finally quiet, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Amelia Hayes, my sister, governor, and unstoppable force, had turned a moment of potential disaster into a timeless lesson. Courage, independence, and the refusal to be underestimated were not just her weapons, they were her essence. And anyone who witnessed it would never forget the day a wheelchair, a ramp, and a fearless woman reminded the world what true power really looks like.